Hi, everyone. My name is Jasmine Gui, and I am the Education Industry Programmer here at the 24th Toronto Real Asian International Film Festival. Welcome to the Canadian Spotlight Artist Talk featuring Oliver Husain. As the Canadian Spotlight is internationally accessible this year, we encourage audiences everywhere to learn the specific histories and stories of the lands they are settled on. Here on Turtle Island, we recognize the numerous treaty lands, agreements, and the unceded territories. We also support and uplift the ongoing work of Indigenous leaders and communities fighting for reparations and justice. Real Asians offices are located on the treaty territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat. This territory is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Covenant, a treaty of collective responsibility for the protection and sharing of land and resources, emblemized by the one spoon. We acknowledge and reckon with as a festival that elevates voices from Asians and Asian diasporic film and media arts, our responsibility as settler immigrants to this land and its original stewards, having benefited from a history and present of broken treaties by the Canadian government. We honor the work and follow the lead of Indigenous organizers, creatives, and communities that are working toward better futures, who continue to give us hope, language, and possibility. Thank you again for being present at our festival this year. We'd also like to thank Crave and Bell Media and the Canada Council for the Arts Digital Strategy Fund and Ontario Creates for their support of the Canadian Spotlight series and for this talk. Just a reminder that if you're watching live from Cinesen and want to ask Oliver questions, to please send it through the Type a Question box to the right of the stream. If you are on a phone, the chat is at the bottom of the screen. You are also more than welcome to hop on the Real Asian Film Forum on Discord to join in festival-wide conversations throughout this time. We have a code of conduct policy that we ask you observe. Please see the links that are being dropped into the chat. Every year, Real Asian chooses to spotlight a Canadian filmmaker, but this year we're spotlighting 3 artists working at the intersections of experiential, experimental, moving image, and narrative. With the festival's move to a digital platform, we took the opportunity to introduce innovative, non-traditional, experiential programming made with digital presentation and engagement in mind. We're excited to host Oliver Husain and his experimental work on Lenticular Cinema tonight. You can engage with his work on the Real Asian website at realasian.com/festival until November 19th. And so now I'm going to hand over the time to Oliver.
Hi, hello, hi. Thank you, Jasmine. Hi. And thank you, Real Asian, for having me. And thanks, everybody, for tuning in. I realized that so the last time I was part of Real Asian was for a workshop a couple of years ago, like a youth workshop. And at the time I was in production for my film French Exit. And I talked about that, and it wasn't complete yet. We were just kind of preparing the shoot. And now I'm presenting the film and talking about it today. So it's full circle. It makes so much sense. So thank you so much. I have some slides to show you. So I'm going to talk first about the film French Exit and related ideas and themes. But I'm not going to show this film because that's part of the Real Asian program. So as Jasmine mentioned, you can check that out until the 19th. And it's 13 minutes long, so it's not that long, and you can maybe do it in between your features. Yeah, so I'm not going to show that, but I have a lot of other clips and stills that I'm going to present. So just a moment. Yeah. So I always feel a bit weird when I give a talk about a short film that like this one is 13 minutes, like I just mentioned, and then the talk is probably going to be much longer than that. But what can you do? And so I'm going to talk about this film for about half my time here, and then I'm going to move into my research on lenticular 3D cinema, so glasses-free 3D cinema, and the history of that. So that's going to be like the nerdy part of the talk. Um, uh, so I'm going to start with how French Exit the film happened and how it came about. So I'm going to show you a little clip of another film that I did. So this back in 2015, I was working on a film in Bangalore that was supposed to be a feature-length hybrid documentary portrait of dancers. The material we filmed back then didn't end up turning into that film, but it popped up in other smaller films and other projects of mine, a series of drawings, for example. One of the dancers and choreographers that I worked with is Deepak Shivaswamy, based in Bangalore at the time, and he's on screen right now. He choreographed a loose scene with dancers on a set of stairs we had built and danced very briefly in it himself. This short clip of him dancing is my favorite part of that footage. He's an unusual dancer, he has a unique moves, and he's very reflective of his practice and his contexts. So to figure out what to do with this short clip, I started to make drawings of stills of this footage. So this is really just the 2 minutes that I'm showing right now. Um, so yeah, to turn it into something else or translate it into something else, I started to take screen grabs and then made ink drawings of those. And I thought about turning them into like a hand-drawn animation or something like that. When I looked at those drawings, I found them too static and they didn't convey the movement at all. They were just like not a good way to translate this movement. And I came up with the idea to cut them up and play around with them. And so I created this kind of simple collage. I'm gonna keep Deepak dancing in the corner over there. So I created this little collage made of stripes, and in the exhibition where I showed that these stripes were hanging, and I titled it Deepak Arranged by Chance. So the idea is that these stripes, the order of these stripes is kind of random, and they could go in any kind of order. And as you can see, they kind of portray the movement that he does in a much better way than a still would do. So the idea to come up with a moving image version of this collage came really organically. And that's what's happening in French Exit. The hanging stripes of the drawing reminded me of vertical blinds. I thought of windows in old school office buildings or tax accountants on Dundas Street, yellow tinted sun protection gels over the window, a potted palm tree peeking through the gaps of the vertical blinds and disturbing the perfect parallel lines. And this is what the installation at Gallery Susan Hobbs looked like. And I used vertical blinds to kind of create an entry situation for the screening of the film. The vertical blind can be seen as a version of a curtain made of soft plastic stripes. I'm very drawn to curtains in general. Curtains appear in my work quite often. My film Perfect Promises, for example, consists of a series of opening curtains, reveal after reveal. This is Perfect Promises. The curtain is a very theatrical device. It frames the stage of the screen and marks the division between the auditorium, the real time, and the space of fiction that opens behind it. The closed curtain is always a promise. It's not only a border, it's also an invitation for an audience to enter a shared world that extends from the stage to occupy the auditorium as well. That shared world is a fictional space, an alternative space. Ian White called it a model of a new world order. I'm very interested in this potential of the screen or the stage as a window into an alternative to the given moment, and how the spaces of the auditorium and the stage, or the space on screen and off screen, mix and overlap and spill into each other. It's kind of an ancient idea or an ancient problem. This is a theater in Vicenza in Italy, built by Palladio in 1590 or something like that. I forgot. Teatro Olimpico, and it doesn't have a curtain. I was talking about curtains. This one doesn't have a curtain, but it is so fascinating because the auditorium and the stage space really are mixed and kind of continue each other. Still, the stage space is clearly marked. This quote by Ian White. You are sat inside a box in the dress circle of the theater. Your own curtain is swept back along the lines of the arc that frames the front of your box, your view. This view almost exactly replicates the proscenium arc of the stage, its own curtain swept back to reveal an on-stage architecture that repeats the stone columns of the auditorium that also frame it, illusory diminishing in size to a vanishing point, the lines of which extend directly from you, uninterrupted, let us say, into the stage space, to an imaginary focal point, at an impossible distance away that is also absolutely present, as if you yourself have been tunneled through space and time, or what is shown tunnels to you, subject of an immediate present. And you realize that you realize that actually you are set inside an 18th century feedback loop that comes from materialist film and or strange I know video via television as cinema in the theater. Like it, you are alive. So a vertical blind is a curtain with regular gaps in it. Moving past slightly opened vertical blinds while looking through these gaps into a space or at a movement behind them is like looking through a slowed down camera shutter. The movement gets fragmented, strobing like a 19th century zoetrope. The spinning zoetrope leads me to the other main element of French Exit. That's the revolving glass door. The film is organized around a specific revolving glass door, which is located on the site of an office building on Queens Quay West in Toronto. The choreography and movements of the dancers, the music by Matt Smith, the entire edit and structure and beat of the film follow these doors. This door, this specific door. So at the time of production, there was a circular ramp to the Gardiner Expressway right next to this door. The ramp has since been demolished. Because of this ramp that sits right next to the door and the reflection of the cars and buses going around it like a carousel, and because the door sits in an otherwise uninterrupted, perfect wall of glass, I got obsessed with this location. I visited really every revolving door in the GTA, and trust me, this one is by far the best. The slide I'm showing right now is from the film Playtime by Tati from 1967, a French movie, and it's in many ways also is kind of an underlying text for the film French Exit. So so I really was kind of obsessed with this specific door that you see right now. And unfortunately, the building management did not agree. And it took 2 years and some friendly interventions and pulling of strings to finally get the permission to film something there. They still didn't allow us to film the dancers on site, though, which was the original plan. But this limitation turned out to be very productive. We filmed the performances inside a studio run by the Tough Guy Mountain Art Collective. The space looks like the opposite of the modern foyer of the office on Queens Quay, and it looks like a neon-lit basement of a hospital with tiles along the walls. So basically perfect. Through overlays and the effect of stripes, the two spaces, contemporary foyer and ghostly basement, get woven into each other in the film. The third space that is always implied is the space of the auditorium, in front of the screen, the space of the viewers. The film is very conscious of its framing in every scene. Dancers enter the screen from the proscenium as if they're entering a stage. The glass wall of the location, like in this shot here, aligns with the screen and divides the screen space from the auditorium. We look at the dancers through the glass. The door, revolving constantly, turns into another kind of curtain, an invitation for the viewer to enter this abstract, interwoven space. But a revolving door, by its revolving nature, always kicks us out as much as it welcomes us. The stripes, the animated mask overlays, start to revolve like the door in the last section of the film, like a constant movement of folding something in or folding the screen into itself. I want to read a short quote by Sarah Ahmed about this idea of this image of space slipping away. And I feel this relates very strongly to the ideas of the film and the choreography in it. I'm not an artist who, goes on set and says, let's do something about this quote that I found by Sarah Ahmed. So this is really something that spoke to me afterwards when I came across it, and I felt it relates to the film. A queer phenomenology might involve an orientation toward what slips, which allows what slips to pass in the unknowable length of its duration. In other words, a queer phenomenology would function as a disorientation device. It would not overcome the disalignment of the horizontal and vertical axis, allowing the oblique to open another angle onto the world. If queer is also an orientation toward queer, a way to approach what is retreating, then what is queer might slide between sexual orientation and other kinds of orientation. Queer would become a matter of how one approaches the objects that slips away, a way to inhabit the world at the point at which things fleet. All right. Oops. So two weeks ago, I had the chance to reassemble the cast and crew of French Exit for a live stream performance. This was organized and commissioned by Art Museum of U of T and curator Yan Wu. And I was super grateful to have the opportunity to work with everybody again. So I'm going to show you a little clip from that. After the philosophical quotes that I that I just made you listen to, I think you need a break. So I'm going to show you this little clip from Streamy Windows, and here we go. So these are Megumi Kokuba and Charlton Diaz. And Charlie was in Edmonton and Megumi was in North York. And we actually used Skype. Can you believe it? We had to use Skype to bring them together. And as you can see, I used the same kind of filter, mask effect with stripes for this to bring those two spaces together and to make those dancers move together. And this worked out quite magically because it wasn't really, yeah, it was very, it wasn't, it couldn't be planned like that, right? Because it was live. Um, and in this live version, the door was replaced by windows, so the title streamy windows, and I used a lot of YouTube clips of relaxing footage of rain against the window. There are hundreds of these like 8-hour clips that you can watch to fall asleep to, and they show rain against the window from every part of the world. And so I thought this is kind of the perfect metaphor for the screen that we're looking at right now, like this kind of private small screen that is not a stage, but still like a window, and is flat, but also opens into something else. Yan Wu, the curator, calls the show immaterial architecture. So of course, I was also thinking about that, about this idea of how the screen space is architecture and opens into a wider zone. So now I'll move on to the second part. I'm going to tell you about my work in progress. So the lenticular Lencture is going to start now. And sorry, I'm going to read another quote. I can't help it. This one is by. So we're talking about stereo cinema now, and I want to read you a short text by Sergei Eisenstein, the Soviet Russian filmmaker who made Battleship Potemkin and so on. I'm sure you're familiar. So when he talks about stereo cinema, what he means, that's his term for 3D cinema, what we call 3D cinema nowadays. So this is On Stereo Cinema from 1947. Sorry. These days you run into a whole lot of people asking, do you believe in stereo cinema? To my mind, this question sounds about as absurd as if they were to say, do you believe that it will be nighttime at midnight? That one day the snow in the streets of Moscow will melt away? That there will be green trees in the summer and apples in the fall? That today will give way to tomorrow? To doubt that tomorrow belongs to stereo cinema is just as naive as it is to doubt the very coming of tomorrow. Yet what is it that allows us to speak with such confidence? Especially when all we see on the screens today are but solitary Robinsonades. And it is very practically symbolic that the best of what we have seen so far was precisely a screen version of Robinson Crusoe. But what we saw above all was little more than Robinson's raft inside the picture, struggling to break through the lianas of the jungle, one of the more convincing stereoscopic images in Andreevsky's film, through the hosts of obstacles blocking the path of stereo cinema. But the day is near when the rafts of lone explorers will give way to stately galleys, frigates and galleons, mighty cruisers, battleships, and dreadnoughts, of breakthroughs and successes, all streaming into the harbors of stereo cinema. So you notice that I secretly wish that I could talk like Sergei Eisenstein all the time. So the essay really calms down after this introduction, and he talks in a much more concentrated way, and actually it's a really beautiful text. And he also talks about the very same tradition of Baroque theater that I mentioned earlier, and how 3D cinema kind of continues a wish of theater and of film to kind of break through that fourth wall that has been, like, that wish has been there, since beginning of cavemen's fire staring. Um, so I totally agree with him. So tomorrow belongs to stereo cinema. Tomorrow belongs to 3D cinema, and it has belonged to 3D cinema since 1947, since he wrote this. Um, one of the fascinating things about 3D cinema is that it is this constant novelty. It's kind of always new. It's always this promise for a better future, and at the same time, like Shrek, it is a thing of the past and kind of something redundant, something that doesn't belong here anymore. So it has these both pulls. It goes both ways. Um, uh, Stereoscopic technology has been around also since the beginnings of cinema, and this is what I'm going to talk to you about now. I'm going to tell you a bit about technology. So 3D works. This is might be really redundant information, but I thought I better cover it. So 3D works in this way that you actually create two films. You have to film two camera positions that resemble the vision of your eyes, so that they look at the world from two slightly different angles. And then the problem is how to, bring that back on the screen and make people see both of these layers, both of these eye layers uh, with separate eyes, so that not both eyes see a mix of those two layers. So this is what Ivanov, the inventor of the Moscow stereoscopic cinema that I'm going to talk about. So this is how he explains it. So here he actually shows a diagram of how 3D works even right now in the cinemas with pole filter glasses, right? So he has these different waves that go in different directions. So light going through in one direction and then in the other, and then the glasses on the other side filter in the filter the lights through pole filter gels. Okay. um, I was always interested in, so of course, I'm interested in 3D cinema and have done a number of stereoscopic films by now because of this, exactly this, this complex that I kept on going on about the auditorium and the screen space, and how how both of these spaces overlap and spill into each other. So because of that, 3D was obviously a very interesting uh, technology for me. And I've always thought about how to, think about other ways of wearing those glasses, because I thought there must be other ways. So this was one solution. It's kind of like a glass, but different. So I'm using Anaglyph 3D, and I use this stand, and visitors of the gallery, this was at TPW, could place their nose in between those two gels, and it actually worked. It was a 3D effect where the hanging ball that you see in the space seems to be surrounded by other hanging balls that are actually projected. So the idea of lenticular cinema is also as old, almost as old as cinema itself. And there were smaller versions of this technology that people explored already in the late 19th century. But they were kind of desktop size, like small viewers. And the idea is like lenticular photography. So you all know those kind of photos that, like the weeping Jesus photo that you move, and it looks three-dimensional because of this raster of lines that is printed or that is laminated on top of the photo. So basically, this is the same idea uh, with cinema. So think of like a grid that is placed, a barrier that is placed in front of the screen, and the light that falls through it creates a shadow. And you see how in this graphic, this shadow creates a pattern of stripes on the screen. And then if you use two projectors, it can happen. You can place them in a very precise position so that those stripes alternate on the screen. Those stripes alternate on the screen, so there are no shadows on the screen because the other projector light coming in at exactly that angle to fill that gap. So what you have is an image that looks like French exit, basically. So it looks like an image that is cut into stripes. And so those inventors thought that this would be a way to actually create a glasses-free 3D effect. And here are some more measurements. So it gets a bit more complicated because of the angle that people are sitting in and the other angle that the projector is throwing the light on the screen. And it gets a little bit tricky. So I was staring at these when I learned about this research. I was staring at these diagrams and tried to figure out how that worked. And I was really fascinated with it. I forgot to mention that how I actually jumped something. So I read that article by Eisenstein. It was published in Public Magazine, actually. And then I was so interested in what was he talking about, like that Robinson Crusoe film that he mentions in the text. I thought, what is this? And so I found out that it was, a film made in the 40s in the Soviet Union, and it was a 3D film. But what I thought was really super exciting was this story, that it was not shown in a cinema with using 3D glasses, but that it was shown in a cinema with as a lenticular projection. So that an entire cinema, an entire auditorium could sit and watch this film in 3D without wearing glasses, but looking at like some sort of parallax barrier, like a fence basically, that was constructed in front of the screen, and that created this effect. So I was really fascinated with this, and this is how I found these drawings by the people who constructed the cinema. His name is Ivanov, the main inventor. Uh, so one of the problems, like I say, is that the effect only works in very precise positions. So your body and your head has to be very precisely positioned in the space for your one eye to see only the one shadow image and the other eye to see the other one. Um, so this seemed almost impossible to me, and I tried to figure it out. And when I'm looking at these diagrams here, it seemed more and more impossible, actually. Mm, uh, also found this amazing image, which was kind of my main source when I started to reconstruct or try to reconstruct uh, the the effect. So this is from Ivanov's lab, and it's the only image, as far as I know, of his work uh, with this parallax barrier. And as you can see, it's kind of on an angle in front of the screen. One thing that I find, it's massive, right? It's like this massive construction. And one thing that I find kind of fascinating and thrilling is how an audience, like somebody like Eisenstein, could sit in a theater and looking at this and still kind of immerse themselves in a Robinson Crusoe story or anything else. You know, how can you ignore uh, this construction? The radial wire raster screen was comprised of around 30,000 black enameled copper wires and weighed 6 tons. Due to the weight of the screen, it had to be assembled in the theater and raised into place, affixed to 2 concrete columns supporting the roof. The interval of the raster lines was, and so on. So it gives all kinds of details. Don't have to read it all to you, but I just wanted to tell you about this massive also material that was used for this experiment. And this at the time when the Second World War was just starting, and metal was sparse, and labor was sparse, and this seems to be so insane, and it seems a little bit unbelievable. Um, when I read about this, this was my first vision how I would do this myself. So I thought about like a gallery space, and there's a projection in the gallery with 2 projectors from those 2 angles to create the effect. And I would create a barrier with that looks like a kind of a prison, a wall, or like a cage, and the the viewers would have to stand because they couldn't just move around in space, right? They have to be positioned in this precise position to get the effect. So I thought of putting them on pedestals so that viewers would stand on a pedestal and they would be very immobile, and so they would turn themselves into some sort of sculpture while they uh, looked at this construction that opened up a space in the, like a three-dimensional space in the projection, but at the same time clearly divided them from this screen space by that cage. So this was the first version in the studio of trying to recreate, trying to understand how that even works and if it's even possible. And as you can see, it's not really scientific research that I'm doing. It's artistic research. So I was thinking as much as like, how will that look, and will that look great? And I think it looks really good. Everything that I projected on that, like this is from one of the 3D projections that I tried out. Everything that I projected on that looked really fascinating because of that moire effect that is happening. There's a lot going on with um, with the with the lights, and it definitely has the dizzying effect of 3D. You know how 3D, when it's broken or if something's off, it can really kind of rewire your brain or hurt your eyes. Uh, so it definitely had that, but it also definitely didn't have an actual 3D effect going on yet. So we decided, me and Matt helped me with this. We decided to get much more precise and measured it. And we also used non-reflective material for the grid and did a much finer grid using black yarn. It was about 500 feet of yarn on that weaving screen that we built. And then we also, just because on all the images that we found, it always has this kind of fan shape. I still not really 100% sure why, but yeah, so we did that and raised it to have it on this angle. And yeah, quite a big construction, actually quite heavy also. And then I tried all kinds of footages, 3D footages and video footages, and projected them, and it always looked fantastic. But like I said, it's kind of, so I asked also other people to come. I was at one point really sure that it was 3D, like in sections when I stared at it. Um, but then others said no, they don't see it. But you know, everybody was definitely very fascinated, and it invited you to also position yourself in front of the screen because you had to kind of find the right angle for something to happen. And uh, um, so yeah, I was on the one hand very happy with it, just because I thought, oh, this is already something, like 3D or not, whatever. But on the other hand, I wanted to know more, like what was going on. So I looked more for images of the actual theater that was built in Moscow, um, and to find, you know, a documentation of what those theaters looked like. And here's some more tests. This one is the one that we use for the event. Um, so there was a theater in Moscow where it was built in 1941, where Eisenstein saw the Robinson Crusoe film, and apparently this cinema housed this giant Ivanov screen. But strangely, there is, in all the literature that I could find, there is not a photo of the interior of this cinema. And in 1941, you know, photography was very common, and it's not, you know, it seems kind of strange that the only image that I could find is replicated in many sources is this one, which looks to me more like it's, you know, like something that is like a sideboard. So it's very hard to determine how big that actually is. The format seems very different to what Ivanov did in that lab shot. So it's kind of very unclear what I'm looking at there. The story goes that after the war. So the cinema was shut down during the war years, and then after the war in 1946, it reopened, and it went as this one, stereo kino cinema, and it kept on being open, and it kept on showing new Soviet 3D productions until the late 1950s. So this is a photo from 1959, and still there is no photo of the interior of this magical lenticular screen. Um, Luckily, through Janine Marchessault, who's a professor at York University, I met a film scholar, um, and she came to visit me in the studio, and she was very excited to see my setup there. Her name is Sanja Obradovic, and she's writing her PhD exactly about this history. And she was really excited to see it, like I said, because she had never witnessed it in person, and she was not surprised that the 3D effect wasn't overwhelming. And so she said that even though she's she understands Russian, she's been to Moscow, she's been to the film museum, she interviewed people who worked with Ivanov at the time, uh, even she never found a photo of what it looked like. And she told me that she started to doubt the whole story. So maybe this history is a myth, and the films were actually shown with glasses in the 50s, and not with this lenticular device. Um, and maybe this was, during the Cold War times, a way of, trying to up the other countries, like with their innovative inventions or something like that. Um, but this is kind of unclear, which makes it even more fascinating for me, of course. So this is a still from this Robinson Crusoe movie, the 3D film that Eisenstein talks about. And I actually also have that clip that he mentions. This is Robinson on his raft, and Eisenstein compares those hanging branches to the obstacles that stereo cinema has to pass on its way to complete success. There's something about 3D cinema. A lot of the stories of 3D cinema that 3D cinema tells are stories of imperialism, of colonialism, like Robinson Crusoe, or like this one, another film that was a famous 3D film that tells a story of looking at the world, exploring the world, charting the world, and with the motive of exploiting it. And I did another 3D film around this theme, called Isla Santa Maria 3D. This is still from that film, and it shows Vanessa Magic, who actually made is the costume designer for French Exit. It's all linked. So she's in the film as one of the representatives from alien planets who come to gather in the future to listen to this story of replica of the Santa Maria of Columbus, Santa Maria, that has deteriorated and has turned into this island. So the film kind of imagines like a monument of imperialism that over time has deteriorated into a pile of dirt, and imagines kind of a utopian um, land, a utopian island that is built upon the remains of this imperial project. So the film, I'm not going to go too deep into this film, but the idea is that it kind of connects the imperial project with 3D technology, with the idea of perspective, with the idea of the Renaissance and the Baroque, of charting the world, with the idea of exploring the world and exploiting the world, and this idea that looking is kind of an aggressive act, or can be an aggressive act. And in the film, it offers kind of a counter image to this idea of looking, with this object like the binoculars with tentacles. This was built by artist Parstu Anushapur, actually, for the film. So the idea is that those tentacles, lashes, come out like tentacles of a squid or an octopus to like touch the world. Here's another quote. My premise is that touch ramifies and shapes accountability. Accountability, caring for, being affected, and entering into responsibility are not ethical abstractions. These mundane, prosaic things are the result of having truck with each other, having to deal with each other. Touch does not make one small. It peppers its partners with attachment sites for world making. Touch, regard, looking back, becoming with, all these make us responsible in unpredictable ways for which worlds take shape. This is a quote by Donna Haraway. So for my new project, I want to work. So I thought about how, for the Lenticular project, how to make this story a little bit more personal. And I thought of tourism, of the idea of tourism, looking as a world as a tourist. So tourism is a very negative concept, because it thinks of consumerism, right? When you're looking at the world as a tourist, you're consuming it. And so I thought about my own travels, and how even when I am somewhere very briefly, like on this trip where I went to Sumatra, um, and the footage you see there in the background, um, I was there kind of half tourist. I was doing a workshop with an artist-run center there, but I was also traveling really in a touristy style, like just looking at the landscape, looking at the styles, looking at the sites. But my I didn't want to put this down so much. Like I feel like the experience was so profound and deep, and I really felt I connected to this landscape much more than I connect to my everyday landscape. Because when you're traveling, you have this heightened sense of awareness, and you really start to see very differently, and experience very differently. And so I want to kind of talk about that, like kind of making maybe like a more positive utopian version uh, of of tourism. So that's going to be maybe the subtext of this work in progress, or the content. So I just running a bit out of time, but this was some footage that I shot during that trip, and I'm at this Vista Point, which is also a garden store and a garden center, and also kind of a ruin. And it's a really fascinating place. And I did this performance about it that you just saw in the background, together with Anis Spadafora, who is also in French Exit and Streamy Windows. And I asked, now as a test, I asked artist Malik McCoy to do like a rendering of some of these elements that you see here. I'm going to show you this. So I think that's, like a layout of what my lenticular cinema might look like in the end, like a 3D version of some elements, of some sculptural elements of this garden, where I play with this fan-shaped grid that that will divide the audience from the screen. Thank you, Malik. He actually did this. He finished this today for me to show this today, so I'm very happy that he did that. Thank you, and thank you all for listening. I'm going to stop it here.
Hi. Hi, Oliver.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Hi. Yes.
Thank
Yes.
you. That was super interesting. Yes, we are running short on time, but I think we have maybe time to discuss one question. And then
Okay. Only one.
for our audiences, actually, if you are interested, feel free to drop more questions in. We will compile them and we will send them to Oliver. And so I think what we can do is Oliver can answer them and then we will post it to our film forum so that we can have like a longer engagement beyond this time frame. So
Sounds good.
um, yeah, I think the question that I'm most interested in asking you from this list here is that it seems like your work is really interested in a physical separation that somehow lends itself to an experiential intimacy or connection.
Mhm.
Could you expand a little bit on why that interests you, maybe?
So I guess this is about this specific project, right?
Yeah, and I think there were quite a few projects where you mentioned the viewer would have to be, like sort of fixed or in a specific position.
Right.
And then you talk a lot about the lines as like parallax or a fence or a
Mm-hmm.
separation.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
then,
Mm-hmm.
there is always this sense that you would want to use those tools or that kind of position to draw the viewer into whatever it is that you're trying to show. So it's a
Mm-hmm.
little bit
Mm-hmm.
of like a paradox
Yeah,
almost.
totally. And
Yeah.
the paradox is also what fascinates me. So this kind of push-pull of drawing the audience in, but also making it clear that, of course, you cannot actually enter that screen. You can only
Hmm.
push that out. And then 3D cinema is making the viewer very static. And so I thought instead of kind of hiding a bit because of how it works, right? Because even with the glasses, you have to kind of sit very static, and you can't move your head. It doesn't work.
Right.
You can't look around like you would usually do. You have to be very, yeah. You're kind of stuck, and I thought instead of pretending that that's not the case, I should play that up
Mm,
and make that a part of the work. So in the installation for Isla Santa Maria, I had these kind of puppet audience, like sticks with
right.
noses on top that have the 3D glasses sitting there. And so there was already kind of a very stick-like audience, kind of waiting for the viewers to join them.
Oh, that's super interesting. I feel like I can squeeze in one more question. um, I think a lot of folks are really interested in possibly how, like this, they could explore strategies or techniques to incorporate some of this research into their own work because I think it lends itself well to digital and physical installation hybrids. So could
Yeah.
you maybe give one or two easy ways that folks could start to conceptualize how to engage with this? Since you've done so
Uh,
much ideating.
so, yeah. So like I said, I'm also sharing this because it feels like it is a project that is not necessarily going to be successful
Hmm.
on the optical side, um, and I love that about it. Uh, um, but there are also like there is also actually like at MIT, for example, there are like state of the art engineers who work with lenticular technology, and they construct these super high tech projection screens where there's like a separate kind of lens for each seat in the auditorium projecting you that specific kind of ray to you. So there's a
Right.
lot you could also explore if you're like. So I'm going really old school, like trying to reconstruct this myth,
Hmm.
but there's actually a lot of like much more state of the art technology and research that's happening around
Hmm.
this. And it's really fascinating.
Cool. Is there also other research that's exploring like the older form that you're trying where you build the whole frame? Or is that
Um,
pretty unique right now for you?
I don't know. I haven't come across. Yeah, I tried to find it, but yeah, of course, I want to see somebody doing this. um, I mean, the Game Boy and you know, a lot of like small devices do that. Like if you look at the 3D screen of the Game Boy, that's lenticular, right? That's how it looks.
Um,
You don't need to wear glasses for that.
right, right,
So
right.
on like a small scale, it is easier, and maybe that's something people should start with. Actually, just do it on your computer screen and
Mm,
build like a paper parallax barrier
right.
and see how that works. And yeah, it's actually quite fascinating.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much, Oliver. We will send you the rest of the questions.
Yeah, please.
Thank you, audiences, for joining us today. Special thank you also to Jamie from TSLIS.
Yeah,
Thank you, Atif, for support, our digital producers, Mimi and Joe. A reminder that Real Asian has amazing programming going on till November 19th. You can check out all our stuff online. The digital installations will be available um, through to November 19th. We also have two more artist talks happening this weekend, tomorrow and on Sunday. So tickets are free for those and available through our box office. So we hope to see you at both of those talks. Thank you for coming again and have a good night.